So a little bit about me. Thank you for the nice intro. That was great. I am in Austin, Texas. I have been a designer for my whole career, a writer, and also an entrepreneur. You guys that are really endeavoring in the social entrepreneurship space, I have so much respect for you because this is not easy. It's a really hard path, but it's also a really rewarding one. It's been one that I've been on for a long time now. And um, as Ben mentioned, I co-founded the Un.Inc. back in 2016 with him. I've co-founded several other social enterprise companies before that. These days, I run an agency called Impact Haven that is focused on helping entrepreneurs launch or pivot their concepts. So, really passionate about helping founders at that stage to tell their story, whether that's in the brand department or with language on their websites through their content. So I work with a small team of creatives, and we collaborate with founders and help them to do that. I am also a mom. I have a 15-year-old daughter, which seems crazy. How that happened, I don't know. That she's 15. So I split my time between entrepreneuring, momming, and I think what I'm most passionate about these days is actually writing. Ben knows this, but I've started to work on a book, which is what I hope to be my first book. But I've been writing for a long time, and this is the first year I've been taking it seriously. So I'm very passionate about pushing myself to try new things and to express what I want to express in the world, and see myself also as a creative as well as just someone who supports other creatives. So that's what I'm really wound up about these days.
Thank you for sharing, Liz. Yeah, I think it's exciting to hear your progress with the book that you've got coming out. And you are particularly gifted at helping people connect the dots between their own personal story and what they're creating. So it's right in line with our topic of MVPs tonight. And so as a designer, storyteller, and social entrepreneur, how do you blend these skills to help founders think about their MVPs, how to think about them?
Sure. So I think a big part of this is, like you mentioned, it is really hard to sometimes translate what is you into the world in a way that you feel comes across effectively. So from a design perspective, I'm always thinking about whether or not the minimum viable product feels like the brand, right? Or in a lot of cases, a founder of a social enterprise is the brand. So does this feel like you? Does it look like you? When someone sees the social media or the website, do they immediately think, oh my gosh, I know this person, right? When it comes to storytelling, I'm always thinking about whether or not we're really getting down to the actual story. So, we can often say like, here I am, I'm selling this product or service, right? That's not really what makes customers connect with you and your minimum viable product. It is actually the story behind the why. So a lot of times when I'm working with founders, I'm talking to them about why does this matter to you in the first place? Why does this need to exist in the world? And finding a way to tell that story as opposed to just telling the how of how you're going to deliver it. So the why is a really big part of the puzzle. And I don't know how much you guys have talked about minimum viable products so far with Un.Inc, but when I look at an MVP at the beginning with a client, with a founder, what we're starting to say is, what's the most simplistic way that someone can experience this concept, right? So say you have some crazy huge idea about an event that takes like 6 days long and is in person and has all these things. How can we boil that down into something that can be experienced maybe in a shorter time frame, maybe online, but has the same elements? So we're always looking for how to really boil it down, and that is hard work because sometimes narrowing it down is complicated. It's hard to kind of decide which things to keep and which things to let go of.
Especially with such a technical term like MVP, and you really bring it back home and say, what is your story in relation to this scrappy thing you're building, and why are people even interested in talking to you or further about as you develop this? So That's a great example. Thank you, Liz. And could you share a few stories of entrepreneurs who've used MVPs in launching ventures?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, my examples are all going to be from the perspective of folks whose MVPs essentially are their websites. So I'll just caveat that at the beginning. Obviously, there are other versions of MVPs that are in-person experiences or physical products, right? But my specialty is in helping people do that online. And so those are going to be what we talk about. What I'll start by saying is that over the years, I've discovered, I didn't really realize I was doing this, but what I've discovered is that I often end up building MVP websites. You know, people start to think about their website and it gets really overwhelming because, oh my gosh, it could be huge, right? All the things that you want to stuff into your website to tell the story or to make sure that everybody understands what it is that you're doing. But helping folks to build an MVP website creates a simplistic example where they can say, here's what I'm doing in the world, and gives them a tangible way for their customers or potential customers to react to it, to give them valuable feedback. So a lot of the times I'm building MVP websites for clients in collaboration with them and helping them to tell the story. So I'm going to talk you guys through a couple examples, if that sounds good. And then I'll also drop these in the chat once I'm done talking, so you can just take a look at them if you want. So is it okay if I screen share?
Please.
Okay, cool. All right, so there's a couple examples I want to talk through. The first is Alessandra Zielinski. So she is an executive coach that I worked with a couple of years ago. She was really looking to do an MVP of her new consulting services. And what was tricky about this is she had 2 or 3 different websites out there on different partner pages. She had her profile and all these groups that she was part of, but she didn't really feel like she was telling her story anywhere specifically. On top of that, a lot of the folks in the coaching world are really concerned with this sort of super buttoned up corporate image, right? And for her, she sees herself as a lot more kind of artistic and creative. So she wanted to feature this image that felt a lot more like, to her, authentic. So this image at the top of her site is actually a painting done by her sister. And she really wanted to feature this as a piece of her brand. So what we talked about was essentially narrowing down her concept to something super simple that would allow her to test it with these 3 different services that she wanted to offer. So coaching, consulting, and facilitation. And so we worked together to narrow down the content, outline everything, and build out the site. It feels a lot more artistic and warmer than any other coach site that you might see out there. And you can kind of notice when you get into her content that you can see a lot of her personality coming through. And there's just this very specific energy, right? And so what she wanted to do was to build this out and launch it as she was moving to a new city, and then test drive it and see if this would drive different types of clients, because she was essentially getting client leads that didn't match what she wanted to work with. And so this was a really fun project to get to build it out. In fact, she wasn't sure when we started if she wanted to use her name or not as the brand. And as we went through the process, she actually identified that she really loved her name. And so we built this logo for her that really highlights the length and the complexity of her name, which is really fun. And so this is one of my favorite type-based logos we've done in a while, because it's very creative feeling and very playful. So this was a really fun one. She's been getting a lot of really good feedback from potential coaching clients, facilitation clients. And then she's going to come back around when she's gotten that and refine this based on the feedback that she's getting. So this one is a very straightforward offering, but it was really, really, I think, important for her to get her personality across in her website. And you see this a lot in industries that are kind of regulated in some way, right? This is another one. This is a completely different situation. So this gal is in Colorado, and she actually makes amazing knit products, so hats and all types of things. And the aspiration behind her brand is really evident. It's all about this kind of life, meadow life, right? This meadowbrook life that she makes up. These are all of her products, and she really wanted to test drive which of her products would sell. And she makes all different types of things. So kids products, adult products, these different headbands. She has, all these different hats that have pom-poms that attach, all these different creative things. And so she wanted to test drive it and find out who was going to buy which things and which things she should make more of, because she was just making, like, constantly making products. And so we organized it and figured out a way to kind of help her to categorize this. So, for example, to find out if people are really spending time on the infant products, the toddlers, adult products, when they were buying them, and that type of thing. So this one was a really cool practice in helping her to narrow down her audience and figure out exactly who she should make product for. She actually wanted to start bigger than this, like a big, Shopify site or something that was much more e-commerce, big e-commerce. And we ended up doing this because she didn't really know what her product catalog should have in it. And so we wanted to make it something that was accessible enough for her to be able to update on her own, and then to learn as she went, what products should she include? What are people responding to? What do they want more of? So this one was really fun to play with. And then one more, this guy is a photographer. He's based out of Austin, actually, and he wanted to have a site that both showcased his portfolio and also allowed people to shop his photography and get it printed. So this is another one where he really wanted to test drive different concepts. This was him. He was promoting Mother's Day collection when we started this. One of the most fun things about this was that he just shared this huge drive of photos with me and said, here's all the photography. I don't really know how to like arrange it, right? It's just all the things. And so we went through and talked about it, and we ended up deciding that every piece of his photography was kind of based in different places. So I ended up having a lot of fun with this and framing it as places of mystery, places of passage, places of stillness and fullness. Like, he has these crazy desert art shots and, beautiful water shots. And so we really played around with how do we specifically organize his content and then test drive it to see who buys what. So he's still in that early mode of testing to find out of his photography, what do people want to buy and what makes them want to buy it. So this is, again, a very simple e-commerce shop, but also allows him to have a portfolio. So he has a whole separate site that we built out that's all just like incredible, big photography. So it was just a lot of fun, and it gives him a chance to test drive it without going too crazy. And then the next iteration, he'll know a lot more about what his customers want to buy, what they're looking for, how to organize it, even the back end of things, like logistically what they're looking for. So those are some examples.
Those are great. And a great way to frame it for any creatives in the room today. Sometimes this might be challenging to think about MVP in the context of if you're an artist or a creative as well, even pursuing something social impact related. So thank you for those examples, Liz. And what advice would you have for aspiring entrepreneurs aiming to build ventures that make a positive difference in society?
A good question. Wait, let me chop this in the chat before I forget to give you guys the examples. Here we go. Here are the ones that we just looked at. Okay. So I think the first advice I would give is that it is personal, you're interested in this, you're interested in what you're doing to make a positive difference in society. It's personal. It's never not. Don't kid yourself, and I think there's a huge importance to owning that about your journey and owning your experience of it. It can be incredibly challenging. I've had that experience myself of just being so tested in the process of trying to bring something to life that really does feel personal to me, that does need to exist in the world. To go along with that, I would say that because it's personal, because you care so much, it's really important to surround yourself with people that have your back, whether those are people who are on your team with you, can kind of balance you out, whether those are folks that just are friends of yours that say, listen, I believe in you, you can keep doing this. I've had to spend a lot of energy when I started out listening to people tell me things that weren't helpful. And over time, I realized that I needed to just not chat with them about the early ideas because they weren't able to handle it. there are definitely folks that are in your world who maybe they want the best for you, but they can't handle the level of personal risk that you're endeavoring to take, or the amount of, emotional energy that it takes. And so just follow your intuition to really make sure that you are surrounding yourself with people that can show up for you when you're struggling in that space of trying to really make this thing happen. It's not going to be a straight line. So when we first started the Un.Inc, the logo had this like crazy curly Q shape in it, because Ben and I would talk about how it's not a straight line. This path of, entrepreneurship is just so windy and crazy. So that was my first advice, is just to really own that and make some careful decisions about how you connect with folks and who you talk to when you're going through the hard times.
Oh, that's great. No, yeah, how we get through the low times, that's so important. So thank you so much for giving those tips there. And if we bring it back to MVPs, I maybe sort of should have saved that question for last, but if we bring it back to MVPs, one more question there. Do you have any other best practices or anything else you wanted to cover there on the topic of MVPs?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 things I came up with for tonight. There's probably 100 of them, but 3 I think that would be good for today. And these are all 3 that I have really struggled with and gotten better at over the years, but they were not things that came naturally to me. So I bring them up because I think it takes some practice to get good at these. It takes some intentionality. The first is to be curious, and it's really challenging because when we have a concept, we have to believe in it enough to work on it and to put it out there in the world, right? And we can tend to be very attached to the way in which we're doing it. I've learned the hard way many times that when we come in thinking we know everything, we are surprised. So there's been some times in my life, especially with previous ventures, where I've just made big assumptions and didn't really want to listen to feedback from customers, from the community at large. I didn't stay in a curious mode. I wanted to go straight from assumptions into knowing everything and then straight into doing it. And oftentimes when we do that, we skip all the good stuff, which is the important feedback we're getting along the way. So I would say staying in a curious mindset is so important, to say, what about this? What do we not know, right? What could we learn more of? Who do we need to talk to? Just staying curious and being open-minded in that way to discover things that you might not even know about, maybe the impact of the work that you're doing or the ways in which it isn't working. So staying curious, be curious. The second one is to be flexible, which is challenging as well. I think that, when you're an entrepreneur, you're making up your own plan and then you're executing on it. Oftentimes it can feel really nice to, like, quote unquote, know what you're doing, right? That's not always the case. Sometimes we don't know what we're doing. And sometimes we wake up one day and think, this is the plan. And then by noon, the whole plan has changed. And so staying flexible, I think, is very, very important. Staying in that mindset that something might have failed for a good reason. Something might have not worked out for a good reason. Maybe there's something new coming in an hour and we just didn't know it, right? So staying in that mindset of being able to kind of roll with it is huge. The third thing is to be iterative. So to really think about always new versions, right? And the MVP is definitely in that vein, coming up with something that is like the most minimal way that someone can experience what you're creating, and then iterating on it and creating another version and another version. It really helps us to stay in those other 2 curious and flexible spaces, because we are constantly thinking, I wonder if this is actually true. Let me ask some more questions. Let me try something different. So the iteration concept, and I don't know if you guys have talked that much about design thinking, but there's a lot of models behind this that talk about how when we iterate on anything creative, whether that's a piece of content that we've written, a business model, a visual design, when we gather feedback and we iterate, we get more and more contextual, right? More and more relevant to the audience and to the people that we're meeting with. So that's another big part of this, I think, is to stay in that iterative headspace and to to not use those dreaded words like we're done, because that's just not, because you just probably aren't, you know, like we want to be, but we're just probably not done most of the time. We're in the process, you know, like all the time.
Those are great. I love those three. And before we jump into the Q&A time, you're one of our few mentors who's actually raised funding for a social impact venture. And I know that can be a really tricky, crazy endeavor. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience raising money? What are some common pitfalls entrepreneurs might encounter while they're trying to raise funds?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little backstory, I was a venture in the past I co-founded was focused on crowdfunding platform for nonprofits. And at the time we were pretty convinced that we needed angel funding because we needed a lot of money for the tech platform and for the launch of the whole thing. And so I got roped into fundraising. I had never done it before. I had never tried to raise angel funding. I remember doing every pitch, every startup pitch that ever happened in Austin, Texas. I did it. And I didn't have a lot of practice in public speaking or in pitching, and it was pretty painful. Honestly, really hard. But I also was really motivated. You know, I really believed in what we were building, and I wanted to see the funding come through. And I think that the irony of the whole thing was that I discovered I was putting myself in all these spaces, pitching and getting in front of investors and trying to find the right investors. But it felt sort of like this blind matchmaking game. Like I couldn't figure out who was behind the wall, you know? And ironically, all that practice, including some pretty horrible pitch scenarios, about a week after I finished all the pitching and I had raised $0. In fact, I had got some pretty critical feedback about how much I sucked at pitching. I ended up accidentally finding the first lead investor for the organization, and he wasn't in a pitch venue. He wasn't in an audience. He was actually running a workshop program, and I just had this little intuition in the back of my brain said, maybe you tell this guy about your venture idea. I wonder if he knows somebody. So I went up to talk to him at the end of the workshop and said, I don't know if this is relevant or not to you, but like I really would like to chat with you about this. And ended up scheduling lunch with him and his wife. And like a week later, we had a conversation. We didn't ask for money or anything like that. A week later, I got an email saying that they wanted to invest in the business. And I was mind blown because I thought I didn't even know these guys had money, let alone like what were we doing at this lunch, you know? And so it really kind of taught me a lot about not taking anything for granted, right? You have no idea who you're talking to, really, right? Like you have no idea what they could do for you. I was just storytelling about what we were doing passionately, and I had been telling it to a lot of people, a lot of audiences. So I was like pretty good at it at that point, after having failed to do it for a long time. So it's really ironic. They were the lead investor, and then they brought some of their pals on board, and next thing you know, we had raised $1 million, which was just nuts. You know, I still can't believe that happened. But you know, at the end of the day, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. The first is to really pay attention to the outcome that you're looking for and the outcome the investor is looking for. So when I finally got into the conversation with this investor, it was really important to me that they knew where we were headed with the venture, what we were looking for, the type of relationship we wanted to have with them. Essentially, we weren't looking for some kind of quick exit tech investment, right? We were looking for a longer term social impact based investment. And it really, really mattered that this guy cared more about me and my co-founder at the time as like the humans that were creating this and our journeys as entrepreneurs than he cared about the revenue on the other end, because we didn't know if there was going to be revenue on the other end. So having these really honest conversations with potential funders or investors is important, because that sets you up for success in the long run. If he had had a different agenda, we would have spent years probably fighting with him about where the direction of the company was going. And in the end, it was actually really peaceful and good. And like, I still am friends with him, you know? So that was pretty crazy. The second thing is timing. I think a lot of founders tend to jump the gun on investment because there's so much publicity, right? There's Shark Tank, there's all this stuff out there that's like, you just walk down the street, you get some funding, next thing you know, everything's fine. But really, I think sometimes funders can take advantage of, investors can take advantage of early stage founders, especially social impact ones, because if they come in early and they take too much of an equity stake or they take too much control, it really will make it really hard for you to execute on your vision. And so I think be very careful about jumping in too early to that type of a funding relationship, and make sure that you feel like you can stand on your own 2 feet and execute on your vision with the support of this funder, and not that you're going to be kind of driven around on their agenda. Those are the top 2 things I would say. And just like, you talk to everybody. Talk to everybody.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is having the honor to be business partners with you, Liz. It's something you were incredibly good at, is talking to everybody. Do you talk to everybody? I think the expression is leave no stone unturned or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know. You never know who you have a 5-minute conversation that leads to some collaboration in the future. You never know.
Yeah. So thank you for telling us that story. That paints a really good picture if
Of
we're
course.
thinking funding. And we had a question from Shaylee about your book. I'd love to get it in the part. Can you tell us a little bit about your book? What's it about? What you got going on?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks for asking, Shaylee. So the working title for the book is called Late July, and it's an exploration of the concept of lateness and how we often are told we're late to the party, right? Late to everything. I've been late to the party most of my life, or so I think. And this is a book that's about many stories from my experience. It's part kind of memoir, part poetry, and it's all about unpacking that and kind of reframing lateness, and exploring it and kind of, I guess, unlearning lateness in a way. So I've been working on it for a little while. I wrote the bulk of it in July, and July is my birthday month rather. So I was born in late July, so that's kind of where this title came from. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. I can put a link in the chat if you guys want to my Substack, which is where I'm going to be publishing it. I'm just starting to promote some early content, and I'm starting to work on basically self-publishing it. So it's a whole new journey for me.